In the Restoration, we like to talk a lot about single people. People that were amazing and wonderful, like Joseph Smith or Brigham Young or Emma Smith or Eliza R. Snow, and how wonderful and amazing they were. But the Restoration was the story of more than just one single person. It's the story of the disciples of Jesus Christ in the latter days and how he worked with them to achieve amazing things. Now, rather than just focusing on a single individual, one of the things that set the church apart from its contemporaries was its emphasis from the beginning on not a single person, but on councils. All throughout the scriptures, councils are an important way that God accomplishes his work. Jesus not only goes out and heals people and teaches the gospel, but he calls a council of 12 apostles to assist him as well. President M. Russell Ballard pointed out that God called a council in the premortal world to present his glorious plan for our eternal welfare. Then he said the Lord's church is organized with councils at every level, beginning with the council of the first presidency and the quorum of the 12 apostles, and extending to stake, ward, quorum, auxiliary, and family councils. Another apostle, Stephen L. Richards, said the genius of our church government is government through councils. And sections 106, 107, and 108 all talk about the establishment of important councils that will lead the church through thick and thin and through the persecutions that it goes through over the next few years. So let's start in section 106, which is really a short, simple revelation that's given to the brother of Oliver Cowdery, Warren Cowdery. Oliver was one of Joseph Smith's most important counselors, and he was thrilled when his brother Warren Cowdery converted to the church. But Warren, who lived in a little town called Freedom, New York, wondered what he could do and what the Lord's purpose was for him. Section 106 calls Warren Cowdery to be the presiding elder in Freedom, New York. But the background for Section 106 also emphasizes the needs for councils. Joseph Smith, before he received Section 106, wrote, "No month ever found me more busily engaged than November. But as my life consisted of activity and unyielding exertion, I made this my rule: when the Lord commands, do it. I continued my labors daily, preparing for the school, and received the following," Section 106, the Doctrine and Covenants. Now, Joseph Smith may have realized around this time that he was maybe too busy, that he was doing too much, and if something happened to him, it could affect or impede the work. Joseph Smith had just had a brush with death when the March of Zion's camp came down with an overwhelming outbreak of cholera. Even Joseph Smith got sick, and it's possible that during that cholera outbreak, he started to wonder what would happen if he passed away, if there was someone else or another group of people that could lead and take over the work. So in Section 107, which was received in a number of different places and times, including a patriarchal blessing that was given to Joseph Smith's father, all of these instructions that the Lord gave about the government of the church were finally put into one place and published in the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants. We might say that Section 107 sets up the church hierarchy, but hierarchy really isn't the best word to describe how the church works. There's really not a hierarchy in the church. President Dallin H. Oaks pointed out that at a general conference, we see the release of some faithful brothers, and we sustain the callings of others. President Oaks said, in this rotation, so familiar in the church, we do not step down when we're released, and we do not step up when we are called. There is no up or down in the service of the Lord. There's only forward or backward, and that difference depends on how we accept and act upon our releases and our callings. So Section 107 was really intended to set up this idea that people could serve in different positions and places within the church, and that didn't really make you higher to be the prophet than it did to be a primary teacher. It was how faithful you were in your service and how much of your mind, heart, and soul you gave into that service. Now, the presiding quorums that were set up within Section 107 of the Doctrine and Covenants are, starting first, the presiding bishopric. The presiding bishopric was intended to oversee the Aaronic priesthood and to administer in temporal things. Section 107 designates them as, quote, a judge in Israel, to do the business of the church, to sit in judgment upon transgressors. The presiding bishopric oversees things like construction of chapels, temples, bishop storehouses, and making sure that everybody in the church has a roof over their head and enough food in their belly. The presiding bishopric oversees all the temporal affairs of the church and leads the Aaronic priesthood. Now, the second council set up in Section 107 of the Doctrine and Covenants is the first presidency. The first presidency consists of 3 high priests that hold the right of presidency to administer in spiritual things and form the highest council in the church. Section 107 sets up the first presidency to deal with the most challenging and difficult problems that exist in the church. Section 107, verse 78 says, the first presidency handles, quote, the most important business of the church and the most difficult cases of the church, inasmuch as there's not satisfaction upon the decision of the bishop or judges. It shall be handed over and carried up unto the council of the church before the presidency of the high priesthood. The first presidency oversees some really difficult things and tries to seek the guidance of the Lord in order to receive his blessings and carry forth in the way he would have them. Now, since the first presidency is the highest council in the church, and councils are supposed to oversee and help when a person transgresses, the question becomes, is there a system for if a member of the first presidency transgresses? Yes. Section 107, verse 82 says, inasmuch as the president of the high priesthood shall transgress, he shall be had in remembrance before the common council of the church, who shall be assisted by 12 counselors of the high priesthood. Thus none shall be exempted from the justice and the laws of God, and all things are done in order and solemnity before him, according to truth and righteousness. So, theoretically, if a member of the first presidency transgressed, their church membership council would be overseen by the common council of the church. So who leads this council? Well, the common council would be presided over by the leader of the common judges in the church, or the presiding bishopric. The bishop is a common judge in Israel, and if a member of the first presidency transgressed, the presiding bishop of the church would form a common council, assisted by 12 high priests, and oversee them. Has this ever happened in the history of the church? Yes, several times. Joseph Smith himself went before the common council 2 times and was glad to do so. When someone accused him of unchristian-like conduct, Joseph Smith was willing to sit down before the common council and hear what they had to say. Both cases he was exonerated, but he was also asked to reach out to the people who'd been offended by his actions and try and make amends with them. There were other cases where members of the first presidency were tried before a common council. For instance, Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer, who were both members of the first presidency, were tried in 1838 and excommunicated by common councils of the church. We haven't had a member of the first presidency of the 12 be excommunicated or leave the church in a really long time. In fact, the last time that it happened was in 1943 when Richard R. Lyman was excommunicated from the church. But one important thing that the historical record teaches us is that when a person is excommunicated or had their church membership taken away, we don't leave them alone in the wilderness. We go after them and we find them. Elder Lyman, after he had his church membership removed, was embraced by the members of his quorum. Other members of the quorum, like Joseph F. Merrill and John A. Woodsoe, reached out to him, took him to dinner, had him over at their houses, took him to football games and for drives on Sunday to make sure that he was okay. And about 11 years after his excommunication, Elder Lyman came back into the church, even sending out this message where he invited the first presidency and the Council of the 12, his friends, to witness his reinstatement. There is some flexibility in the way quorums can work based on what Section 107 says. For instance, the first presidency is supposed to consist of 3 high priests. Brigham Young had 2 counselors, George A. Smith and Daniel H. Wells, but he also had 5 additional counselors that assisted in the work of the first presidency. As late as 1970, President David O. McKay had 2 counselors, but he called 3 additional counselors to assist as well. The last time we had an additional counselor in the first presidency was in 1981, when all 3 members of the first presidency had major health concerns, and they had to call a 3rd counselor in order to carry out their work. That 3rd counselor is someone you've probably heard of named Gordon B. Hinckley. After President N. Eldon Tanner passed away, President Hinckley was brought into the first presidency as 2nd counselor and continued to lead and guide the church as one of the counselors in the first presidency. Because President Hinckley led the church as a counselor when some of the presidents of the church got sick, he also established the rules that govern that. President Hinckley said, when the president is ill or not able to function fully in all the duties of his office, his counselors together comprise a quorum of the first presidency, and they carry on with the day-to-day work of the presidency. But any major questions of policy, procedures, programs, or doctrine are considered deliberately and prayerfully by the first presidency and the 12 together, which brings us to the next governing council of the church, the 12 apostles. Early on, when this revelation was received, there were only really 2 church centers in Ohio and Missouri. Each of these church centers had their own high council, but there were a number of branches scattered around the world that needed assistance and guidance and needed their own high council. That's where the Quorum of the 12 came in. They were intended to be a traveling high council. Because they didn't have any local assignment, they were designated as general authorities, just like the first presidency, and were told to build up the church and regulate its affairs in all nations. In our time, the Quorum of the 12 presides over the entire world, and you'll note that a lot of the apostles have really, really rigorous traveling schedules as they visit different countries, especially countries where the church is new and is still developing. The Quorum of the 12 apostles serve right under the first presidency in importance in leadership and help others to come unto Christ. Now, another council setup was the 70. The 70 was presided over by 7 presidents and were asked to assist the 12 in traveling to build up the kingdom. By the 1970s, the work of the church had grown so great that the 70, or the Office of 70, was turned into an area and general authority office so that they could assist them. And today, a member of the Quorum of the 70 will often do the kind of work that a member of the Quorum of the 12 did a century ago, traveling to stake conferences, setting apart stake presidencies, and helping just generally assist and regulate the work. Now, in Section 107, it designates that the first presidency, the Quorum of the 12, and the Quorum of the 70 are all equal in authority. But don't let that mislead you. The first presidency leads the church. The reason why the other offices are designated as being equal in authority is just in case anything happens to the first presidency. Every single one of them is a witness of Jesus Christ. But for instance, the first presidency is dissolved when the president of the church passes away. With no first presidency, the Quorum of the 12 still has the keys and takes over leadership. So, how is the government of the church a little bit different than, say, a civil government? Well, nobody runs for office in the church. People are called by revelation and serve according to the Lord's will. Some people serve for life, some people serve until the age of 70, and some people, like the General Relief Society president, might only serve for 2 or 3 years in a term and then turn it over to someone else. But everybody accepts their duty to serve and the call from God to serve, and are sustained in general conference by leaders of the church. Now, if you want to see someone journey through the hierarchy, actually take a look at Section 108 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which is received on behalf of a great man named Lyman Sherman, who's not particularly well known in the church today. Lyman Sherman was an early convert to the church who was designated as one of the first presidents of the Quorum of the 70. He was one of the 7 presidents designated in 1835. And this revelation given to him around that time is the Lord consoling and counseling him. The Lord said, "Let your soul be at rest concerning your spiritual standing, and resist no more my voice." And the Lord also promised Lyman that if he would wait patiently, he'd be able to attend a solemn assembly called by my servants, where you shall be remembered by the first of mine elders, and receive right by ordination with the rest of mine elders, and chosen. Lyman was actually able to attend this solemn assembly in the Kirtland Temple, where he was among the presidency of the 70 that were blessed and had power sealed upon their heads, and given authority to anoint their brethren. And according to Joseph Smith, in this meeting, the heavens were open. Now, Lyman remained a faithful 70 throughout the rest of his life, and was even designated an apostle in a letter written in January 1839 by the first presidency. Lyman was intended to replace a member of the Quorum of the 12, Orson Hyde, who had temporarily apostatized. Unfortunately, Lyman passed away just 11 days after the letter was written, and before he could be ordained to the 12. He never had a chance to become an apostle, and Orson Hyde eventually repented and came back into the church. But the Lord wanted Lyman Sherman to know that he had the right stuff to be an apostle before he was carried into the next life. So how do these councils affect us? Well, regardless of what you do in the church or what your calling is, you're part of a council. Revelation can come to a single individual, but often when it comes to church matters, it comes to a group of individuals who all together are seeking to know the will of the Lord. The genius of church government is in its councils. And as we meet together as councils, and as we counsel together with one another, we can receive the revelation we need to do what we need to do. So it's not necessarily just up to you to make all the right decisions and be the amazing person that solves all the problems that happen in the church. Often, being the leader of a council means that you bring out the best in the people around you, and that you allow them to help you and listen to the revelation that the Lord gives to them, and seek to receive revelation altogether, so that you can receive the guidance you need to get answers to your prayers, to find solutions to your problems, and to help the Lord build up the kingdom of God on the earth.